So before I start walking you through the development of the art scene in Bangladesh from grassroots initiatives, there's going to be several references to extremely ugly and tragic moments of history. Most of the news that you read about Bangladesh is overwhelmingly negative. So I want to preface this presentation with the fact that Bangladesh is actually an extremely resilient nation that, while consistently listed as one of the worst places in the world to live due to traffic and population density that's also exacerbated by climate change, its people are also consistently ranked very high on the global happiness indexes. It's the first modern nation to exist from a desire to speak its own language, which I will talk about more later. But it's also a secular country with a female head of state, a very high female workforce, and microcredit was also invented there. So they're coming up with their own solutions to very complex problems. And while there are no contemporary art museums nor galleries that represent artists in a conventional kind of way, nor is there a class of collectors collecting contemporary art. Artists from Bangladesh this year alone have exhibited at the Kunsthalle Zurich, the Gwangju Biennial, Singapore Biennale, Documenta, and many other global platforms. The quality of the work is really high, and culture is something that binds Bangladeshis together, and it thrives despite difficult circumstances. So actually the largest classical music festival in the world is in Bangladesh. Again, it's Hindustani classical music, but in terms of the number of performers and the number of people going, it's really quite impressive. So jumping into the presentation, I'm starting with images of a work by an artist named Zainal Abidin. Works from this Famine series from 1943 and 1944 are on view in Documenta in the Neue Galerie right now, so some of these images might be familiar to you. Zainal Abidin was born in British India, so he was born under the British Empire, and he studied in Calcutta, and he was the first Muslim student to win distinction in the Calcutta Art School. The images that you're seeing here are part of his most famous series, which is called the Famine series, that was first exhibited in 1944. And basically, there was a man-made famine that happened in Bengal, and the tragedy of this incident is what inspired these extremely graphic works. This famine, the Great Famine of Bengal in 1943, is said to have killed about 4 million people. And it happened because during that time, as I mentioned, Bengal was part of the colonial government of British India, and during World War II, Japan had occupied most of Southeast Asia. So Japan had hit all the way up to Burma, which is a neighbor of Bangladesh, and the British government thought that Bengal might be the next one to fall. So in preparation for the possible enemy occupation, they removed Bengali rice stalks, destroyed the boats, which was the most common means of transport. So basically, they also destroyed the steamers and the trains, and they paralyzed river communication. So basically, there was no way for people to get access to food, and this was basically a man-made incident. And the hampered food supply, also with inflation and rising prices and hoarding, also conspired to bring about this famine. And moved by this tragedy, Abidin worked as an artist witness. He made his own ink by burning charcoal and used it on cheap, ordinary packing paper, which is what you're seeing here. He not only documented the famine, but he also revealed the famine's sinister face through the skeletal figures of these people who were fated to die from starvation. These sketches helped him find his way in a realistic approach that focused on human suffering, struggle, and protest. And he was a very socially aware artist, and also later became part of the Bangladeshi independence movement. After the British split up India in 1947, something that was very complicated, which I will get into in future slides, is that the British split up, they made India, but then they split up Pakistan into two wings. So there was West Pakistan, which we currently know as Pakistan, and there was also East Pakistan, which we now know as Bangladesh. But what was very complicated about this is that the only thing that united these two countries was religion, but as we know, there's a lot of plurality in how we practice religions. They spoke different languages, they had different customs, they ate different food, they're also physically very different. There was no, other than religion, there was no real reason to do that, and that led to problems later. But under East Pakistan, Zainal Abidin was commissioned to start the first art school in that region. So in 1948, he was the founder of the College of Arts and Crafts, which is known as Charukala, which is now the Faculty of Fine Arts, the University of Dhaka, which is the first fine art school in the region now known as Bangladesh. So he was extremely inspired by the teachings of Rabindranath Tagore and Shantiniketan, and he wanted, I guess in a way similar to the secession here, to create their own form of art, one that wasn't taking inspiration from the West, but generating their own form. And so Tagore looked to Japan and China for inspiration, as did Zainal Abidin. So actually this school, which still exists today, and it's one of the two main art schools in Bangladesh, it still teaches something called Oriental art, which is a mix of Japanese watercolor techniques, Mughal miniature painting. It's really its own kind of synthesis. However, it is important to note that this school now has a partnership with Slade, and they're trying to revive its curriculum, and actually the Slade in its own archives found pictures of Zainal Abidin doing a research trip there as well. So I think to say that they were completely not looking at Western art would be inaccurate. This stunning building was designed in 1955 by a modernist Bangladeshi architect named Muzharul Islam. He was also responsible for getting Louis Kahn to design the Parliament building in Bangladesh, which is one of the most spectacular buildings I've ever been in. So Muzharul Islam was actually, he studied at Yale, and he was approached to design the Parliament building. And he actually said, I'm not worthy, you should get someone bigger. So he first contacted Corbusier, who was too busy, so then they went to Louis Kahn. I think this kind of humility behind him, it left a really lasting legacy, also with contemporary Bangladeshi architects, which are also having unprecedented international attention given the quality of their buildings and their also innovation when it comes to building in the face of climate change. It's important to note that Muzharul Islam was also a staunch communist. However, he distanced himself from this ideology when he saw what Mao's communism was doing to culture in China under the Cultural Revolution. So it's important to note that culture is really the glue that holds Bengali identity together, and it's a culture that could also connect across religions. So while I mentioned East Pakistan and West Pakistan, there was also East Bengal and West Bengal. So today, Calcutta is West Bengal, Dhaka is East Bengal. So there was another split there where the Hindus were sent into West Bengal and the Muslims were sent into East Bengal. However, in their own rural folk culture, the folk culture between these religions really mixed. There was no kind of religious tension, and in the folk art, you see mythologies coming from many different religions. This is an image of the Louis Kahn Parliament building, just so you get an example. I talked about the synthesis of religions in folk culture. This is a beautiful work, one of my favorites, which is by a Bangladeshi artist named Rashid Chowdhury. He studied at La École des Beaux-Arts, and he studied tapestry making. And so this is called Golden Harvest, so you're seeing Bengali poetry about stories about the harvest and also myths about the harvest. But again, there are different religions that are inside this kind of cubist construction. This was all made with local vegetable dyes and local weavers, and he started a movement in the south in Chittagong. This is an image, a recent image, so this is Bengali New Year, and these floats are all made in the courtyard of this art school. So basically the students, recent graduates, they all come together in mid-April right before the rains, and they make these incredible floats. And this is very much part of Bengali and Bangladeshi identity. However, as you can see, these are figurative sculptures, so religious fundamentalists are really trying to kill this because they're saying this is not Bangladeshi. However, it is, and the majority of people are really for this, so they also make floats that are against religious extremism. Going back in time, I want to just tell a little bit about the language movement and why language and freedom of speech are so important to Bangladesh. So I need to preface the rest of this presentation talking about February of 1952. So February of 1952, specifically February 21st, this is now known as International Mother Language Day. So the UN created this because of Bangladesh. So in 1952, the West Pakistani government declared Urdu the official language. So Bengali was no longer an official language, and students, of course, were protesting against this, and they were brutally shot down by Pakistani soldiers. So what you're seeing on the left was a makeshift monument that was made on February 23rd, so 2 days later, but it was abruptly destroyed 3 days later. In 1956, so that was 4 years later, Bengali was finally given official status along with Urdu, but the tensions still remained high. So Zainul Abidin and Mozzarella Islam, the two figures I spoke about before, were a very important part of this independence movement. Soon after this, another monument, it's called the Schrade Minar, was commissioned to honor the rise of the Bengali language. So it was only completed, so this 1956 is when Bengali was allowed. This monument was completed in 1963 by modern artists Hamidur Rahman and Novera Ahmed, and it was martial law that caused that delay. But it was again destroyed in 1971 during something called Operation Searchlight, which is where the Pakistani military searched out Bengali intellectuals and killed them right before the beginning of the, right before the end of the war. So the best way to kill a culture is to kill the brain. So again, very, very bloody and difficult history. So this monument was destroyed again in 1971, and it was since rebuilt, but not in the same way that it was originally imagined by the two artists I mentioned. But this painting in the middle is one that I really respond to. Sadly, it's lost, but it's called Victory Tower, and it was made by an artist who I'll discuss later named Syed Jehangir. And so basically you can destroy the monument, you can destroy the Schrade Minar as many times as you want, so it's taking the form as the Schrade Minar, but you know, the people will stand up for their rights and for their power. So this was made, at that time, all of the money was in West Pakistan. So the artists who are now Bangladeshi were actually living and making work in Pakistan, and there's an entire period of history that's lost because, let's say if I'm going in an art history book and I'm trying to learn about works by Bangladeshi artists from the period of 1947 to 1971, that country doesn't exist anymore. Those artists also, some of them changed the spelling of their names in solidarity with their language. So even if I go to the Asia Art Archive's website, unless I know this, you won't find the listings. So it's actually quite difficult. So I won't dwell on this because I'm not talking about specific artists, but this is an image of Novera Ahmed, who is one of the artists that I mentioned who designed the Schrade Minar. But a large part of my job these days is actually trying to identify and find these East Pakistani artworks and get them back into Bangladesh. So this image on the right is a cement sculpture. It's life size, so it's about 5'8", it's almost my height, and it's called Standing Figure, and it's from 1960, and it took me about 3 years to convince the person in Pakistan that it should come back to Bangladesh. But it's really wonderful because local artists are able to access their own art history in a way, like, again, it's not in books. Coming back to Documenta and coming back to today, some of you might have seen this work, which was in the Lands Museum in Kassel, and it's by a New York-based artist of Bangladeshi origin named Naeem Mohaimin. And this work is called Two Meetings in a Funeral, and in this project, Mohaimin shifts his focus to an unsteady alliance of Soviet-leaning state leaders, mediating on lost moments and misrecognitions at the crossroads of 1973 to 1974. The Third World Project failed not only because of external enemies, but also due to a tragic mistake of the 1970s pivot from socialism to Islamism as a unifying ideology. Traveling through the residue of gigantism in transnational architecture, so he's looking at architecture of Niemeyer, Moretti, Le Corbusier in Algeria, Dhaka in New York, and in conversation with Vijay Prasad, the film explores the tension between the non-aligned movement and the Organization for Islamic Cooperation. It proposes, after Prasad's Darker Nation, that the utopian hope of the Third World Liberalization Project failed not only because of external enemies, but also the fatal mistake of the 1970s pivot that I mentioned before. So in Documenta, this funeral considers the lost moments and misrecognitions of the crossroads of 1973 to 1974. Bangladesh became a member of the non-aligned movement in 1973 at a time where global powers like the United States supported Pakistan. It's also very interesting to look at Saudi Arabia was also very upset about Bangladesh's independence because while Pakistan is an Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Bangladesh is actually a secular country, and that's part of its constitution as well, which remains to this day. So this film also goes through a very interesting chronology as to when countries began to recognize Bangladesh as a country. Interestingly, which I just looked up today, the first two non-Asian countries to recognize Bangladesh were Poland and Bulgaria. Continuing, so in this spirit, Bangladesh has I guess since its very new country, since 1971, but since its inception, has been trying to chart its own place in the world away from Western validation. And one of these key examples is with the Asian Art Biennial, which was founded in Bangladesh in 1981 in Dhaka. And while the Gwangju Biennial claims to have this position, it's actually the Asian Art Biennial in Dhaka, which is the oldest biennial of contemporary art that still exists in Asia today. I'm not saying it's as relevant as the Gwangju Biennial, it definitely is not, but at one point in time, it was extremely important and pioneering in the first of its kind. So the artist that made the Victory Tower painting that I showed you, this is him as a young man in Japan doing research for the Asian Art Biennial with his bell-bottom suit and sunglasses inside, and behind him is a tapestry by Rashid Chowdhury. But interestingly enough, as I go doing research on this Asian Art Biennial, I actually have to go to Japan to find the archives because Japan was very involved in setting this up. Because they catalyzed their own, it wasn't a biennial, but they had an Asian art show in 1980 where many of those works later traveled to Bangladesh and they were involved in setting that up. And there remains to this day a very close relationship between Japan and Bangladesh. So this is an early installation shot of the Asian Art Biennial in 1981. And interestingly enough, we also showed that work, this painting by an artist named Shafuddin Ahmed. We showed this in the last Dacha Art Summit. So the first few editions of the Asian Art Biennial were very strong, mostly because the governments who they invited declined to participate. So that meant that actually it was leading artists at the time that kind of became de facto curators and organized their own participation. And the quality of these artists were quite high because Syed Jehangir, the man in the sunglasses here, was actually meeting the top artists of each of these scenes when he was in Japan and over whiskey, showing them pictures of Bangladesh and getting them personally invested in this process. But after Syed Jehangir left, this all took another turn, and it's now very much a government relations project. So while it still has the name of the Asian Art Biennial, Austria participates, and the embassy chooses what artists they want to have there. And there's no curator, there's no theme, and it's quite a mess. However, in this last Biennale, there was a beautiful work produced by a young Bangladeshi artist named Ritu Sartar, and this was called Lost Tune. And she was also dealing with kind of the growing extremism in Bangladesh. So these are, I think it was 61 performers with old harmoniums, which is a traditional instrument used in Bengal, and they were all playing the same note, but also in solidarity to the push to end music in this context. Again, it's only really happening in very rural areas. I mentioned that there's a very vibrant classical music festival, but this is a really powerful work, and we're currently commissioning a new version of this work in partnership with the Liverpool Biennial, and it's going to take on other forms. So there's no curatorial structure or institutional structure within the Asian Art Biennial to allow it to take the path that perhaps something like the Gwangju Biennial can. However, the artists are taking their own initiative and creating really interesting works that are finding other avenues. Where is this coming from? So I mentioned the Charukala, the Faculty of Fine Arts, University of Dhaka. This is another image of it. What I also love about this building is that the outside and the inside are coming in together. So some classes are taught outside. This is it almost looks like a lace partition. This is going throughout the space, and it's referencing traditional Mughal architecture. It's really a fantastic building. But the thing is here, photography is not considered art, performance is not considered art, video is not considered art. It's a very classical form of education. There is another side, which is a fantastic private photography school, which is called the Pashala South Asian Institute of Photography, which was founded in 1998 by an artist and activist named Shwedul Alam. They have produced amazing work. It was also funded with World Press Photo, so it does take a bit of a documentary approach, but a lot of the more interesting artists today are coming out of the school. However, they don't have access to the same kind of classical education in the government art school. So part of what we're doing is try to find ways to bring these two groups of students and alumni together. This school produces a photography biennial, which is called the Chobi Mela, which means picture fair, basically. And this is one of the oldest festivals of photography in Asia. It was started in 2000. And it's international in scope. They show, I would say, very daring works, often in public spaces. So these are some installation shots of old biennials. Interestingly enough, the Dhaka Art Summit, the Asian Art Biennial, and the Chobi Mela all happen in the same building, which is the National Academy for Fine and Performing Arts. So this is a shot from inside that building. But they also use abandoned and underused spaces in very interesting ways. So this is an old theater that's not really used that they've transformed during the festival. This is one of the artists. So a lot of the artists that are alumni of these schools also teach. So this is an artist named Woden Wassouf. He was recently in the Gwangju Biennial and is becoming more and more internationally visible. But this is a work that I really love of his, which I showed in Vienna last summer. And it's from a series called In God We Trust. And what you're seeing here are images of his father. So that's the person on the far left, his sister and his wife. And they're shot in the style of Flemish portraiture, but they're talking about what their Bengali identity means to them via culture and religion and the friction between these in the current society, grappling how to be Bengali, so the language that they speak and the culture that they celebrate, which I showed you the floats. Bangladeshi, which is, again, a secular expression of Bengali identity, and also Muslim, because 90% of the people living there are Muslim. So it's a beautiful conversation about the tensions running between these three factors, which everyone there, or most people, embody in current society. One of the spaces that most people know about in Bangladesh or at least those who are interested in Bangladesh, is called Brito, and the Brito Arts Trust is a nonprofit network. It's part of the Triangle Network, and it was founded in 2000. And it was really the first space to have a global reach. So while the Asian Art Biennial was looking within Asia, the Brito Arts Trust was looking further out. And it's artist run, and they say that their spirit lies in innovation, dedication, collaboration, commitment, and passion. And they've done projects in different places across the country. The space is in an old marketplace, and they also have a residency. So it's one of the oldest alternative spaces and artist-led spaces that exists in Bangladesh. It was founded by two artists. So one artist they're married to each other. This is an artist named Tayyeba Begum Lipi. And this was is a work called Love Bed, which debuted at the first Dacha Art Summit in 2012, and it's now in the collection of the Guggenheim. And basically, in the village where Lipi comes from, the babies are delivered with these kinds of razor blades. And Lipi never had children, so a lot of these works are about the loss that she felt by not being able to have a child. So there's some cots, there's this bed, there's a whole series. Unfortunately now there's also shoes, handbags, and bird cages. So sometimes internationalization might not necessarily be a good thing. But she and then her husband, Mahbubur Rahman, have been pioneers in this scene. This is a work by Mahbubur Rahman called Transformation, and it was a performance work I think that began in 2004. Yeah, 2004, and he's performing wearing basically a hood mounted with buffalo horns, and he's walking around the streets of Dhaka, and it's referencing this really painful folk myth that actually has, I'm sure it's not only a myth, but it's a story about a farmer who went out into the fields, and he brought his son along, and then he was pulling the plow as if he were the bull, and the son was asking, like, where is the bull? And there was no bull because they had to kill it for food. And then the farmer's back broke, and he starts wailing like a bull, and it's a really disturbing and sad story. But basically, this performance is playing with that sense of impotence and contrasting the symbolic value of the horns with blind and hopeless wanderings. So I think his performance practice is really strong. The kind of limitation of Brito is that it became a bit too founder specific. So it was, these two artists who were traveling around the world talking about their initiative, where the younger artists weren't really given a voice. And this is something in our class that we've been talking about as well. How do you grow an initiative beyond the founders? So there's a generational shift happening in Bangladesh right now. So this is another member of the Brito Arts Trust. Her name is Ayesha Sultana. She was born in 1984. She was also in the Gwangju Biennial, but she's just been acquired by a few major Western institutions. It's not public yet, so I can't talk about it, but she's a new wave of young Bangladeshi talent. And this is a work I really love of hers, hard to see in a photo, but this is an image from a festival that Brito put together in Old Dhaka, which was called 1 Square Mile, where basically over 1 square mile of the old town, there were performances and happenings and installations to help people get to know, this part of town that they normally weren't spending time in. And if you look really closely, there's gold leaf on this wall. And so basically this is an area called Panchbari, and it's an old residential structure that used to be owned by 5 brothers, so that's what Panchbari means. And it was actually, there's very little left of the original architecture, but there's a courtyard with these dramatic pillars and archways where you think of what might have happened there at some time. So actually this was a place where the family practiced Hindu rituals, which is not something they want to talk about anymore. But she gilded the deep running cracks and nooks of this archway with gold leaf, and it was really inspired by the Japanese practice of kintsugi, where you're basically putting together cracked ceramics with gold and finding beauty in these imperfections. And I think this was a really sensitive and beautiful engagement with the local scene. What's also nice in this rise of the new generation is she's also teaching at the photography school. So while she didn't go to the photography school, she's teaching at the photography school, and there's starting to be cross-pollination between these groups. So rather than people being a member of only one group, they're cross-pollinating each other. Which gets me to the next slide, which is talking about groups, which is also something that we're now working on a lot at the Samdani Art Foundation, is that, so for I think the last Gwangju Biennale, GB11, included a large number of Bangladeshi artists for the first time. So this is an installation shot of Ayesha Sultana's presentation in the Gwangju Biennale. But the Gwangju Biennale also had a program which they called Fellows, which they said were roughly 100 small and medium-scale art organizations across the world whose work makes important contributions to the art of today, yet remains under the radar. Biennale Fellows will continue doing the important work they normally do without GB11 being involved in their activities. In a 2-day forum, Biennale Fellows, as well as their peers and colleagues, are invited to come together, share experiences, and discuss the future of this kind of work, especially with regards to questions of value, continuity, and scale. This was a really fantastic initiative. However, what I learned was through what I do at the Dacha Art Summit, which to step a bit back, it's a festival that happens every 2 years. That's a platform for Bangladeshi and South Asian artists to show their work, but also to do research into historical moments as well. So we amplify these activities of what other artists and initiatives are doing. We would have no summit if it weren't for the initiatives of these other artists, and people would not be coming to Bangladesh were it not for the quality of these artworks. It's not a place you go as a tourist. However, what we saw was that we were giving hyper visibility to any organization that spoke English or that had kind of an interface that could work with international people. But I mentioned that language is an extremely important part of Bangladeshi identity. We identified at least 16 artist-led organizations that mostly operate in Bengali, that don't have websites, and that are self-funded, and they're doing really interesting work, but it's just not accessible through the internet. And they're not going to be meeting you at a cocktail party because they might be working in a village somewhere. So we decided to create a forum for these initiatives, and we come together twice a year to kind of discuss what their needs are, to help them, I guess, even articulate what their mission statement is, to, rather than taking the attention away from them, give them a platform to present their work and also to collaborate with each other. And it's been really fascinating. Like, these institutions are really, really different. I'll just walk you through a few of them. But like one of them, this Ecological, they're an electronic music label, but they also collaborate with artists. There's a group called Gidri Bauli, which means fairy tale in Shantal, which is a tribal language. And they have, for 16 years, have been working with the Shantal community in northwestern Bangladesh, and they do residencies as well. So this is an installation. These are terracotta rats, but it's also commenting on the colonial history of Bengal. And they were working with the traditional, craft techniques of these people. They also have craft fairs, so their art activities are benefiting the local tribal community, and they've really created a beautiful ecosystem, not one of exploitation, but one where they're growing together. This is an initiative that's called Uronto, and it's a roaming residency across Bangladesh that's started by an artist named Sadia Mirzan, and she does research into abandoned guess, historical buildings across Bangladesh. So not in Dhaka, but in different regions. And so it actually takes her a long time to find these buildings. And then she does residencies, international residencies inside these buildings where they talk to the owners or the people around to kind of collect the stories about the space, and they do site-specific installations, but they purposely don't publicize this because they don't want these to become tourist traps. So there will be a publication eventually, but again, this is very artist-centric, under the radar, but very interesting in terms of the kinds of buildings and histories that they're able to unearth. And again, histories that show the real plurality of this region, or of Bangladesh. This is another one of my favorite initiatives, which is a bit crazy, but I love that. It's an offshoot of Brito, so some of the members used to be part of Brito, and it's called Shoni Monglar Ada, which means Saturday, Tuesday meeting place. And so basically these artists, and anyone can be a member, so they don't want to have a list of members. It's really an open platform. They don't want to have a bank account, but they've taken over a restaurant. So basically there's a restaurant that's near the Art Academy, and at first they felt like there was no space for artists to come together and discuss their work. So no one was going to this restaurant, so they spoke to the restaurant owner and said, well, could we have these talks every Tuesday and Saturday? People pay for their own food, so they have like a transparent box, people pay for their food and drink, and they pay a little extra, so whatever's left over is paid to the speaker. So every Tuesday and Saturday they have a different speaker. It's interdisciplinary. They also do exhibitions in here. And it actually ended up happening that the artists have bought out the management of the restaurant, and they're now running the restaurant. And I mean, I don't know how that's going as a business, but I hope it's going well, because then they can use that money to fuel their own practice. But I think it's, anyway, a very interesting model, and Bangladesh is all about new models. And then in the south, there's another initiative called Jog Art Space. Jog means like play and collaborate, and this is not, it's hard to tell, but basically this is a projection on the ground. It's an aerial shot, and this is in a marketplace in Chittagong in the south. And they do festivals in marketplaces and residencies, and they invite, they work a lot with Japanese and Korean curators, but there's a really great kind of, I guess, festival movement happening down there. And if Dhaka doesn't have contemporary art museums or galleries, Chittagong certainly doesn't. So they're really helping build their own art scene. And I find all of these initiatives extremely inspiring, and that is what, I guess those are some of the grassroots initiatives of Bangladesh, and I'm here to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Thank you very much for this enlightening talk, Diana. I mean, I would like to know, my first question would be, could you describe the audience?
Yes. So that's something I think that also really surprises a lot of people coming to Bangladesh, or at least for the Dacha Art Summit. So our last Dacha Art Summit, we had 138,000 local visitors in 4 days. So that's 3,000 people an hour. And they really are all cross sections of society. So tea sellers, lawyers, farmers, firemen, like really, and of all ages, old people, young people, kids. And today we had a talk with Sumesh Sharma from the Clark House, and he was also mentioning how, like, while Bangladesh and India are very close together, they're very different because Bangladesh never had a caste system. So you don't have those same, like, in India you would not find this diverse group of audience in one place. Like, not, I would argue, not even in the Chobi Biennial. Like, people are coming at different times. They're not kind of intermingling with each other. But I can't take credit for that audience. Like, yes, they enjoy the exhibition, but people really crave culture locally. Festivals are very much a part of that. So I mentioned there's the Asian Art Biennial, there's the Photography Festival, there are 4 book fairs, there was even a Hay Literature Festival, the Classical Music Festival, the Bengali New Year. Bangladesh is also the most densely populated large country in the world, so the Vatican is more dense, but that doesn't really count. People are living on top of each other, and they also, I guess, thrive off of that. That idea of being isolated from everyone else is just not possible. So that is something that I find hard to replicate in other contexts. So as a curator, sometimes I get very frustrated where it seems like the art world is just talking to itself. So for me, it's extremely refreshing to see that actually I'm accountable to all different kinds of people. And so far it's worked out pretty well, I would say. Like it's a very strange audience where in my exhibition, my audience is Glenn Lowry and a tea seller, and I have to make them both equally happy. That's a very challenging kind of situation, but it's a good challenge, I think. And also people are very engaged. So that's both in Calcutta and in Bangladesh. Like the Bengali identity is one of intellectuals. So they ask a lot of questions, a lot of critical questions, and artists were also, like, I think, pleasantly surprised seeing how much time all of our wall texts are bilingual. We're also going to have bilingual arts mediators this time. But it's also a very high literacy rate. Most people read. But yeah, the amount of time that people are spending with the text. And also, it's very interesting the kind of reviews we get, because they're not coming from art critics, they're coming from, again, firemen, lawyers, regular people.
And do these people also buy art? Or?
Not contemporary art, that's the problem. So like I showed you Tayyiba Begum Lipi, whose work is in the Guggenheim. I think she has 2 Bangladeshi collectors. Ayesha Sultana, I think 1 Bangladeshi collector. It's not, I mean, the same thing, India is also suffering. It's a very small market for contemporary art because people are buying art as an investment. So Zainul Abidin, those works will sell, I mean, priceless, right? But again, it's only selling in its own ecosystem, right? So, or Rashid Chowdhury, for example. These works are, the tapestries, they're very hard to get because most of the works he did were government commissions and therefore cannot be sold. So if you find someone with one privately, it's a small pool, it's a small market. So we tried to buy one 2 weeks ago, and we had a price agreed handshake, and someone came in and offered twice the amount of money, and suddenly it's not ours. So, in that case, like, so for modern art, yes, but for contemporary art, no. So that's also interesting, is that the artists are not supporting themselves financially by being artists. So they're teaching, they're working other day jobs, but in a way, sometimes, which I also think is a case in Pakistan, there's extremely strong art being produced in Pakistan, but that's also because artists are making their livelihood off of teaching. It's not the local market. So it's interesting that actually young artists in Bangladesh, again, I'm generalizing, but if we're generalizing for a generation, there's more mobility for this young 30s generation in Bangladesh than there is for the equivalent in India. And perhaps that is because they're not creating works for a market, because there is no market. That's not to say that international galleries aren't picking them up. So that's happening. So again, like, their markets are outside, and we think it's great because artists need to make money to survive. So, we're really happy when international galleries sign artists. There's a Bangladeshi artist in residency at Galerie Krinzinger right now. There's a lot. My assistant curator is curating a show in Vienna next month. There's a lot of, I guess, mobility opportunities at the moment.
And how would you describe the role of the Samdani Art Foundation? And also, I mean, they are big collectors.
Yes, they are. So they are basically, they're the people buying contemporary Bangladeshi art in Bangladesh. And again, like, a lot of these artists have never sold a work before. So it's also quite, it's an interesting situation. But they really see their role as patrons. And I was explaining to my class that I am extremely lucky because they do not get involved at all in the content. Mm-hmm. So they see that they are there to provide a platform for professionals to engage with Bangladesh, and they take the role as the host. And they do a really good job of that. So anyone who's coming to Bangladesh who emails them, they will invite them home, they will, share artist portfolios, they will send them around, and we really want people to make their own. So for the summit, for example, we show over 300 artists, 65% of them are Bangladeshi. So it's really a big cross-section of the local scene. We don't want to tell anyone what artists they should be looking at. We want people to make their own decisions. So that's why now I think publications are going to become more important. How do we also step back so that we don't have to be the personal guide? And I think that the artist-led initiatives also falls into that category because we want them to be the guides to their own art scene. And we are supporting them to have exhibitions. And we are also finding a big challenge is a lot of the local spaces in which artists could exhibit their work are closing. So now we are opening an art center. So we're purposely not using the word museum because in this developing context, it's very alienating if you're thinking of a rich person with their stuff that's going to share it with you. I mean, I'm using crass language here. But if it's an art center, kind of like the word summit, it's not a biennale. It's not an intimidating word. Art center, not really an intimidating word. So that's opening in late 2018 in a village in Bangladesh called Sylhet. There will also be residencies and there's a sculpture park as well. But we find that actually what we really need to do is open a permanent space in Dhaka. So that probably, because we have land, but the permissions, it probably won't be built till 2021, 2022. But when that happens, it is my hope that the summit can be something that's open every day and can really benefit local people to not only see art for 4 days every 2 years in the way we show it, but that we can actually have daily programming. But that will take some time.
And where does the money come from this?
Packaged foods.
Which food?
Packaged foods. So like French fries, sauces, oils. I was extremely skeptical. So I like to be careful, where is the money coming from? And they're very young. I think she's 35, he's 43, very, very young. But if you look at Bangladesh, it's a population of unofficially 180 million. In India, most people have cooks. But in Bangladesh, because cooks, you're basically someone's slave. You're living in their house. You don't have freedom to come and go. So people would actually rather work in a factory where they'll get overtime if they're staying late. So people actually do eat packaged foods in Bangladesh. It's unthinkable in India, like to have a frozen samosa, not happening. But in Bangladesh, that happens. So if you multiply this by the population, it's quite huge. And also Bangladesh imports most of its food other than rice. And so they also trade commodities. So that's where this comes from. But what's very interesting is that we're working with Superflex on a project right now. And of course, they're obsessed with all the food factories. On the Dacha Art Summit, a lot of people who work in the factories come and work on the art projects. So that's also why we have to keep the summit so short, because the business losses by people not being in the office it's multi-layered. But yeah, I hope they also have an ice cream factory, so that's how we have made our climate-controlled art storage, because that's how we learned how to control temperatures. So it's really interesting how these other businesses help the art in ways that one wouldn't expect.
So other questions from you?
Yes, Anna.
This is all very interesting. I'm curious. You were mentioning the artist-led organizations that are kind of reluctant to take part in any kind of publicity activity.
I don't know that it's reluctant, but if you're so busy working and you're short-staffed, publicity is sometimes the last thing that you work on. I don't think it's a reluctance. I think it's a lack of time.
Okay, I was asking, I'm going to ask how you motivate them to take part, but if you could elaborate on this.
Yeah.
Because I don't really get it.
Yeah, okay. So for example, if I'm in a village 13 hours away working with this community without internet, I probably don't have time to be updating a website or blogging or doing all these things, especially if you're short-staffed and it's your own money and you're really focused on the project. So actually, I think a lot of the most interesting work that's being done, people are doing work, they're not talking about it. There's some people who like to talk, there's some people who like to do. And in this case, that's the case. So we're just helping them, again, I have all these strange situations in my life. We had someone who was live blogging for eFlux in the last Dacha Art Summit, and she was from Liverpool, and she bumped into a general visitor in one of the exhibitions, like a Bengali guy. They fell in love. She moved to Bangladesh, so she is working. So they now have she writes for Art Review, a lot of different magazines. So they now have her working with them to basically create write-ups on what they're doing. We're making a publication that has images and descriptions of their projects. But it's great because we all love to hear what each other is working on, and we all have very different views of what's happening. And For example, our next summit, the Office for Contemporary Art in Norway wants to have a project working with indigenous writers, but not only from Norway, also from indigenous communities in Bangladesh and in Australia and in different countries. But we thought it'd be really interesting, rather than us doing this in Dhaka, why don't we have them do it with Gidri Bauli in their residency space in the village, because they can actually engage with those communities. So we're trying to also decentralize the activities, because we have a lot of international partners wanting to work with us, but I think it would actually be much more interesting if they were working with these other artist-led initiatives, but they're just not aware of what they're doing. Oh, we also take them on study tours. So part of the agreement of this partnership is that, so it's a 3-year partnership. We have 2 meetings a year. So the first one, we kind of all present what we're working on, and there's a guest speaker. So this time it was Catherine Veer, who helped set up the Asia Pacific Triennial in Brisbane, but she's now the head of international initiatives at the Pompidou, and she is curating a new biennial that's opening at the Pompidou in October, which is basically about collective activity in the Global South. So her research interest is about this, and she started presenting, after hearing all of these initiatives work, started presenting comparable examples and contexts that she had encountered. So part of it is these meetings, and then the other part is we take them on study tours to see exhibitions that we think might be interesting to their initiatives. So we took, so every initiative will have someone go on a trip. We just took 4 of them to Documenta in Athens, Kassel, and Munster, but again, it's tailored to the needs of each initiative.
Hey, I don't think I have to introduce myself to you, but everyone else that is learning the course, I'm Pedro. Not only because of the presentation, but also because of what we've been discussing in the course, I realized that all initiatives that you involved are very artist-centered, in the sense that empowering the artists in the region. However, I hope I didn't put you too much on the spot, but taking from something you said here now during the presentation, when the patrons for those initiatives are also collectors, and when you say that there are artists that have never sold works before, how do you negotiate? How does this negotiation go? Who do you defend, the artist or the patron or the collector? And is it possible to be, for lack of a better word, fair in such a transaction?
I think that's a very good question. So the way I tried to deal with it, at least for the first 2 editions, I wasn't involved in the first Dacha Art Summit. So the second and third Dacha Art Summit, we actually made a policy that we don't show the collection in the summit. So we kept them very separate. And I think that was really smart as well, because I think it's irresponsible to use a public platform like that to promote one private collection. However, some of the works that we commissioned in the last summit were really strong, so we ended up buying them after. So going forward, I can't say that they're not connected, because they now are. But again, it happens after. We don't commission things to collect. We also buy it through the gallery, if there is a gallery. If there's not a gallery, we try to be as fair as, because again, we're trying to support the artist. So even collecting work sometimes is to support the artist. There's a young artist of Bangladeshi origin at the Vienna Academy. She needed money for materials. We acquired work mostly to support her to make new work. It wasn't really about just, yes, we love the work, but it was more, we were seeing it as a role of a patron. But we're not trying to exploit artists in that sense. But we also help artists. So if other people want to buy the work, or if they get these kind of questions, we help them with that as well. I would like to do less of that, but yeah, it happens.
So more questions?
Hi, thank you for the talk. I'm curious to, this is a really interesting overview of different structures and organizations. And it seems to me like, it's a kind of inevitable, let's say, joining of a global art world that happened in many non-centric, let's say, or non-European or non-Western countries in the past maybe 25 years or so. So it's a kind of like, yeah, let's sort of build structures and join the global art world and of course the economical and all the flows of money, the passage of money. Also there's like a whole, let's say, a map of an economical map that we can look at in terms of how these non-Western cities, countries have been also joining the global art world, let's say. And in a way, I mean, that's something really good to have art structures and art organization, and anyway, all these grassroots organizations, are mobilized, and that's really impressive. But on the other hand, I think that maybe, this sort of like joining the art world comes always with resistances and with usually like a strong critical discourse. So it would be good maybe to talk a little bit about what critical discourse is coming out of this, other than artists digging into history and curators digging into building art historical narratives. I think that there's also maybe other critical discourses that are as political that come through in this process of sort of like joining the art world. And also this happens a lot when maybe like galleries start to open and international galleries start to come in. Sometimes also they want to open spaces, and I don't know what's here. But it would be good maybe to emphasize a little bit more on this.
Sure. I should also preface this by international galleries will never open in Bangladesh, and that's also because we have 120% import tax on foreign art, so 800% tax on cars. So it's actually a place that's meant to keep people out, not a place that's meant to bring them in. And I think also in the local scene, like I probably shouldn't talk about this, but I'm going to, but people are traumatized, like especially in the art community. There were some horrible incidents. There was a terrible terrorist attack last year, almost a year ago, which was the Holy Bakery incident, which happened the Friday before Eid, where it was in a cafe we all went to, in a very safe neighborhood, where basically some some students who came from the upper middle class asked the people in the restaurant if you could recite the Quran, and if you couldn't, they tortured and killed you, and posted it on the internet. It was incredibly scary. There were other incidents where like LGBT editors were brutally, and again, the people who are doing this are doing it in very public ways to scare people, and it worked. But I think that part of the thing of people coming together is a political act of resistance, because if they're not, I mentioned the art spaces are closing, this is why they are closing. People are afraid of secular space. I mentioned that this is a secular country. These examples are extreme. I feel safer in Bangladesh than I feel in Paris. But again, these incidents happen. The Chobi Mela, what I didn't show you is, again, like, it's an international thing, but like they're showing extremely political work. They're showing work that is, the other thing that I have to praise and thank the Bangladeshi government is that at least with visual art, is different with film, but with visual art, they don't censor things. So there can be works that are critical of the government. It's fine, you see those. For example, like both in the Dhaka Art Summit, also in the Photography Biennial, there are works that are openly dealing with homosexuality. It's fine, they're in public space. People want to discuss this, but that space is becoming smaller and smaller, and I think that is why artists are joining forces this way. It didn't always used to be like that. So also like when the Dacha Art Summit started, we actually, so like you said, this global discourse, there were a lot of artists that were boycotting it and didn't want to be a part of it. But it was after they saw what had happened that they wanted to. So actually, I think that was kind of a good thing where like the second summit, we actually had artists that refused to meet any of the guest curators because they just did not want to be involved. And then they saw what we did, and now they're very much a part of the organization. But I think what's good about the organization, which is not coming across in this presentation, is kind of how messy the structure of the summit is, because it's meant to, the summit, it can mean anything or nothing. And people can take what they want from it, and it shows all kinds of crossroads of the art scene. And we had to take a call after the incident last year as to whether we wanted to go ahead with this or not. And we realized that actually, even if we don't get a single international visitor, we don't really care. It's about the local audience, and that it's really urgent to continue with this right now. But I think that art is a space that people can talk about things that they might not be able to write about or talk or speak about. And I think that that's also something that's really showing, also with performance practice in Bangladesh at the moment as well. So we're not trying to flatten out everyone and kind of make each other the same. It's more just trying to create a support network. So if someone, for example, is having a problem or is scared, like, it's at least a place where people can come together and talk about it. I should also say that because the summit happens in partnership with the Ministry of Culture, like, so they don't get involved at all in the content, but they give us the building and security. At least, like, we're promised that the summit will be the safest place you can possibly go in Bangladesh at that time. Since then, the music festival happened, no problem, record audiences, literature festival, no problem, record audiences. So it seems like things are getting back to, hopefully back to normal, but there is, this very much is running through people's consciousness.
Yeah, good. So thank you very much, Diana, for this interesting talk. Thank you for being here and for the discussion. Thank you.